The year was 70 CE, and Jerusalem was under siege by the Roman army. The city had been the center of a Jewish revolt against imperial rule for several years, but now it seemed that the end was near.
The rebels had hoped that God would send them a deliverer, who would restore the kingdom of Israel and free them from oppression. But instead, they faced starvation, disease, and death. Among the besieged inhabitants of Jerusalem, there was a small group of people who had heard a rumor that the Messiah had come, but he was no longer here. The stories about this man were various and conflicting. No one could agree on exactly who he was or what he had done, but they all agreed that he was a man named Jesus, who had been unjustly killed. After that, they said that he had gone away, but that he would soon return to judge the world and establish his reign. These people had never seen Jesus, nor had they met anyone who had.
They had no evidence for their claims, except for some vague prophecies and some oral traditions. They had no writings, no witnesses, no relics, no signs. They had only faith in a story that they had invented, or that someone else had invented for them. They had faith in a fictional character, a mythical hero, a phantom messiah.
These people were not Jews, nor were they pagans. They were a new sect, a new religion, a new cult. They called themselves the followers of the way, and they believed that they were the chosen ones, the elect, the saints.
They had been abandoned by their religious leaders, and now they adopted new identities, formed new loyalties, and willfully disobeyed their ancient laws.
The most important champion of the new faith turned out to be a Jew who initially persecuted the members of the new movement.
As a young man, Saul had fled with his parents from northern Galilee when the Romans invaded the region, taking refuge in the thriving city of Tarsus in Asia Minor. Saul, following his strict upbringing and schooling, was a devout Jew and a Pharisee.
When the war ended, he harassed the fledgling Christians beginning in Tarsus and traveling south. Not content to just punish them, Saul argued with adherents of the new sect and searched the scriptures to see if they were justified in their beliefs. Just outside Damascus, tired and thirsty, he had a conversion experience in the hot sun. He thought he heard a voice, the voice of Jesus, castigating him. Unable to reconcile this experience with his upbringing, Saul fled to Arabia and then sometime later returned to Damascus. Three years after his conversion, he went south to Jerusalem and met with Cephas and James, who were at that time the leaders of the church in Jerusalem.
Cephas had been the first person to see the risen Lord. After this short visit, Saul, who by this time had changed his name to Paul, departed to do missionary work in Syria and beyond, convinced that God had called him to this important work.
Finally, Paul arrived in Corinth in Greece, where he was very successful, performing miracles, preaching, and teaching full-time outdoors in the countryside and in lecture halls. But Paul was not content with his efforts in Asia and Greece. He traveled to Rome with the intention of reaching Spain, but his plans were thwarted, and he was betrayed by his enemies and arrested by the Roman authorities. Finally, after 2 trials before the prefects of Rome, he was executed abandoned by many of his erstwhile comrades, a martyr to the cause.
But the religion lived on in the hearts and minds of his followers. Other books were written. Other leaders emerged. Despite harassment and opposition from local populations and schisms and heresies within the movement, the brothers and sisters continued to meet, to believe, and to increase their numbers. The story of Jesus, the man from Galilee who was crucified and rose from the dead, with its universal appeal, secretly prospered and could not be killed,